Good afternoon or evening, or I don't even know what day it is anymore. I'm Chase Cunningham. I'm the host of the Dr. Zero Trust podcast. I'm at a somewhat undisclosed location near the Nevada desert, possibly Area 51. I'm here with Mr. McGraw. So, Mr. McGraw, why don't you give us a bit of background on who you are and what you do?
Terry McGraw, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Cape Endeavors Incorporated. We are a cyber solutions provider for the defense industrial base around the new cyber maturity model certification program. So we do all things related to that.
And you're a retired Army as well.
Yeah,
correct?
retired.
So we got an Army and Navy guy in the room.
That's right.
Yeah. So I have to call you sir?
No,
Okay.
similar feels. I did spend 7 years enlisted, and then I was commissioned for 20 years.
Oh, awesome.
But I was also in the cyberspace as you were. I think you were a Navy Crippy, right?
Yep, I was a crypto guy.
Yeah. So I had a bunch of Crippies. I think Captain Promotable Josh Sanders is now used to work for me in NSA. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
I would call it an interesting hand grenade that's been thrown into the market. Like, where are we at with that currently? Because no one seems to really have a gauge or gouge on like who's got to do CMMC what, when it's going to happen, etc. What is the reality?
Yeah, well, so I guess a little bit of background. Well, number one, it was signed into law last year. So it went in.
So it's law.
It is law. And it was a 3-year phase in. First year, self-attestation, meaning self-validation that you're doing it right, according to 801. Next year, you have to be certified by or assessed by a third-party organization. And then after that, a level 3 may kick in, which will be at the DoD's discretion to provide layer 3 of the program to specific defense contractors. Things
for the
large
whole DIB, like the whole DIB has to do this.
The entire DIB. If you have a DoD contract, you must be CMMC compliant this year.
So how does that, like, if you're a mom and pop shop that they make, I don't know, an O-ring for the F-35, how do they deal with that?
Well, so it's interesting because since 2011, the DFARS, actually, I think it started in 2011 under the Obama administration, but in 2015, they entered a clause into every DoD contract that says you will adhere to 801.71. So these companies have been attesting to like years that they've been doing this. The reality is they just haven't been. So I have a slight sympathy for new small business that are entering in. But if you've been doing this a while, you've been taking taxpayer dollars and attesting to the government that you've been handling the data correctly. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for companies saying, oh, this is really, really expensive. Well, you should have been doing this all along. That said, we do understand that it is for new DoD contracts and smaller business, it can be a financial error. So we try to be as cost effective as humanly possible to get them secure. There's really 3 ways they can do it. They can build a secure enclave. We build secure enclaves for them. They can lift their whole environment to 801.71 compliance as attested, which there's a lot of barriers to doing that in reality. Data provenance, people, outside the U.S., etc. Or you build a greenfield, you migrate into it. Generally speaking, the fastest, most effective, and affordable way to do it is to build an enclave and handle the DoD data in a very confined area.
Just that one thing. That's it.
And then you're complying with the DoD's directives. Enter a SPUR score of 110, and your commercial network remains unaffected. And you just say, "I've got the layer 1 handle."
Then does that though? I mean, that makes sense to me from the architectural design side of it, but does that introduce risk at all if someone's like connecting from an unsecure something to the enclave, or how is that handled?
So there is no necessarily B2B connection except by exception, and it has to be with another GCC high or .mil. I mean, it has to be also compliant with CMMC in order to connect to it.
Okay. So they have to be in the same pool.
Yes, exactly. The way we do the enclave creation here at Cape is we build them an enclave. We get a separate .us email. They have a secure SharePoint that's built inside the air, so they can send secure hyperlinks to documents they would need to share with the government or other contractors. And the government and other contractors can also share secure folders and files with them in SharePoint. And email is a last resort. You can still do it from a .us because it's also an Exchange or a 365 built in GCCI. So you can still get in and out of the environment, but there is an expectation that if you're handling the CUI, you are handling it appropriately, and the people you're getting and receiving it from are also handling it appropriately.
Well, but assumptions and expectations are, kind of 2 things that will often let you down.
It's true, which is why the DoD said everyone who has a DoD contract must comply with this.
So are they going to start killing contracts? Or
yeah, they're charging civil fraud initiatives. Like the people our Civil Fraud Act is in effect. They've been going after companies. Millions of dollars have already been fined against companies that have been found to be misrepresenting their status.
Is anybody going out of business because of this?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so yet. I do think there's a couple existential threats to the program itself. And this is sort of like George Akerlof's market of lemons, right? You, in an asymmetric information exchange, sometimes people opt out. I think the danger to the DoD is that small business or key business has said the DoD business is not worth me doing this. It's not worth the extra capital investment or the extra pain. I'm just not going to do it, and opting out. I do think that we may lose some key supply chain. I do think that Stacey Bostianick and Katie Arrington are well aware. They're working through these issues. There is cost reclamation clauses in the DFARS. So, there is some cost recovery that you can apply in the contract. But in general, I think the biggest misconception is 871 is just a compliance framework. It's not. If you read it, it's a best practices guide. Like you and I, if we were building a network, we would build it to 80171. So I think some of this, the market will adjust. I do think that small business will have to make a determination. Is this worth the contract? But, literally for a small company, you're probably looking at a $30,000 to $90,000 investment, to become fully compliant. And then maintaining that compliance is a few grand a month, for an output.
I mean, if you got a multi-million-dollar contract, then, do the math, right?
If I make shoelaces and I'm in the DoD and my profit margin is 3%, and can I make shoelaces for somebody else? I mean, I do think there's some of that, some, SWOT analysis that will go on with companies, whether or not they'll say
maybe some of those companies should go away anyway. Cause I mean, if you and I be in military, we see the folks that charge crazy amounts of money for stuff that you're like, really? Why am I paying you $25 for this, wrench I can get from, Lowe's for $6?
Well, it's true. And the reality is, look, I mean, the Joint Strike Fighter the Chinese fighter looks exactly like our Joint Strike Fighter. Their space shuttle looked exactly like ours. Their Humvee looks exactly like ours. They didn't take that from a SIPRNet or a TS network. They took that from the Defense Industrial Base. And as a taxpayer, you and I, our tax dollars have been funding the R&D development for other nation states. And I think it's time to call that I'm fully with Katie Arrington on this. It's time to call BS. You've been saying you've been doing it. So now the government's checking your homework. And now you're upset? I think I understand the angst, but I don't necessarily agree that, you can just raise your hand and say, oh, this is an onerous compliance framework. It's not. It's a best practices guide.
Well, and I guess that also makes me think of the question around if all these people, we know what best practices are. If you're choosing to not do best practices, the gamble shouldn't be on the taxpayer to accept that.
Absolutely.
That's your problem.
Yeah.
So just tangentially to this, because you mentioned leadership up there, I wanted to get your opinion. The new folks that are coming in, I have I think it's a valid concern that Sean Cairncross, the guy that literally has been appointed to run cyber, said during his testimony on Congress, he's like, I don't know much about cyber. How does that play into this thing?
It is interesting because if you look at the commercial world, it's the same problem.
Yeah.
Not to borrow too much from George Akerlof's Market of Lemons, but for your audience, he described an asymmetric information marketplace, meaning one party has all the information and the party seeking a service has very little, which is what he used the used car market as an example. So in the used car market, if you're selling a used car, you know everything about it, ostensibly. I'm trying to figure out, is this a piece of crap or is this something worth buying? He called them lemons and peaches, which is why we call used cars lemons. So he created that moniker in his PhD thesis, which was the asymmetric marketplace. So there is, in cybersecurity, we've done the same thing. If I build widgets, I build car parts, I build, I can build components for the space shuttle. That is what I do. Cybersecurity is a margin hit. It's, yes, you can create some business risk reduction, but it's hard to qualify or quantify, generally speaking. You try to outsource that as much as possible because the fewer people I have that are not making widgets are impacting my margin and my profit loss statement. So we've created this marketplace of external cyber providers, service providers. And it's very hard for folks that have no idea of cybersecurity, much less how it relates to business risk mitigation. They have a really hard time assessing the value therein. And because we've outsourced to a high degree, the cybersecurity providers, CrowdStrikes and the SentinelOnes and the Sophoses, and they're all people I know and love, but people buying their services don't know the level of service you're getting. They don't know the quality of service. They're taking the vendor's word for it. And as a consequence, I think we've got an entire corporate leadership structure that extends to the government, by the way, who can't accurately assess how well cybersecurity is being done. how well the technology works, how well it's implemented, how well the people I've hired to operate it can operate it, how many people I brought in to service as an external provider. So not only do they not speak cyber, but now they have no leadership that can accurately, assess the impact or how well what they've procured works. And I think the problem also extends to government. You've got people who have grown up in policy, have grown up in other parts, or they brought it from the private sector. But even the private sector doesn't do this very well now. And you know this, right? I mean, we do this every day. It is very difficult for corporate America. And which one of the things I coach my CISOs on is you have to translate what you know into something your board can understand. You have to speak the language of the board. And that depends on the vertical that they're in. And so it's not uncommon that the government has people that, give lip service to cyber, but don't really understand it. And, which is why I think there's been some internal debate about CMMC. Like, oh, is this too cost prohibitive for small business? And what should we do about it? I don't know if we should go forward. And there's that internal debate. The people who know and understand the problem set are like, we will get through the political nonsense. This is something that absolutely has to be done.
I mean, I think it's a really good approach overall. I can totally see the maybe justifiable freak out for some of these folks. They're like, I have no idea what to do about this thing. And now I'm going to lose this big contract. Cause I mean, there's people that they clean toilets, they get contracts for that. So well,
it also depends. Like if you're not handling control, so the DFARS clause in 800-171 and CMMC is broken into levels. Level 1 is basic blockade. It's basic hygiene. It's I have antivirus. I mean, it's very minimal stuff, right? Any business should have this. Layer 2 or level 2, doesn't kick in until you're handling CY specified and things like that have a higher sensitivity layer. The government knows that someone making shoelaces and someone building parts to a JDAM are different, right? And so, there's different levels that they have to apply. So some of this, but I would say, we do this for a living, right? We do this for many companies in the DIB. And I will tell you that we can get a company fully compliant for less than 1 FTE. For cheaper than you can hire an IT person to come in and even try to help you do this, we can get you fully compliant. So does it seem expensive? Yes. If you're not looking at it in comparison to hiring a full-time employee, a fully loaded cost of a head, we will build an enclave, move the data, provide all the documentation, be your assessing, your voice to the assessing body. We'll do all that for less than you would even pay one person to do this full time.
That's a pretty good measure of business values. Humans are the most expensive thing that we have to deal with all the time. Yeah. So where do we go with this next? Like, is there going to be a new standard? Because that's one of the things I think people get a little bit irritable about when we talk about these compliance standards and frameworks is, okay, man, I got CMMC level 1 or 2. And then it's like 2 years down the road. Well, now you got to go off and do this.
So I do think that it will mature as the threat matures, as the landscape changes and we have to. So for example, quantum cryptography comes in and, everything that we based normal cryptography off, it goes away. We have to have quantum resilient, implementation. So I think things like that will change the dynamic, but that should be expected. Unlike stuff like ISO 27001 and 2, these big, very management intensive, very administrative overhead, very, very onerous bureaucratic processes. 800-171 has very little of that. It's very practical security advice. So the framework really is targeted towards security. And it's why I really like it. So it might seem onerous if you really don't understand the structure of security. When we say it's a compliant framework, it is. But it's a compliant framework that has very little overhead, very practical application for security. So that's the way I like it. But I do think as the threat landscapes change, they will have to adjust the framework. But it's about as thin as you can make it and be effective.
I mean, so that's fair if they're able to make it. What's the most kind of egregious example you've seen with these orgs as you've helped them move in towards, a CMMC compliant environment? Is it as bad as I can imagine?
The biggest problem they have is they don't understand where the CUI is up to this point. So now you're getting your homework inspected. If let's just say you're a company that has a global presence, not just small. Look, any medium or large business where it has multiple prongs. That CUI, had a pre-sales, it had an input, a processing, and an output. It went through your company. And if you've got any, footprint whatsoever, that CUI may be and very likely is where it's not supposed to be. And the biggest challenge that I've seen, we don't talk about cybercrime enough, because we talk about, Chinese or the Russians will take data. But if I'm a victim of ransomware, exfiltration of data is ubiquitous now in cybercrime for holding companies hostage, which also means that DoD data now went to
Wherever.
wherever. And so the hardest part that I've seen with companies of larger size is, where the hell is that data? And the data loss prevention tools, and I can name several of them, but you know them, or the data tagging solutions, their fidelity rate when it comes to actually accurately identifying CUI, it sucks. And so we created a software because the market just didn't have any. And so I think for most companies, the biggest problem they're going to have is, where the hell is this stuff? And who's touching it? Like, how many people actually deal with it? How many times has it been copied? Like, I send it to you, you save it. He sends it, he saves it, she saves it. Now you got CUI everywhere it's not supposed to be. And there's no authoritative way. And they certainly weren't tagging it before it came in. So that's by far, they don't know how to scope it because they don't know where it's at, and they don't know who's touching it. So we spent 30 days building the enclave is simple. It's like that. Interviewing people to figure out that data flow process, that's the hardest part.
So there's a pretty big consultative sort of side of that.
You have to. 'Cause 80, what? I guess we're down to 56% is what I heard the latest stats. But earlier in the year, 82% of companies that were seeking assessment were failing the initial call with the assessor.
Failing the call, the first call.
They'll go through a prerequisite of stuff. Have you done this, done this, done this? And if you get that pause, that pregnant pause, like the assessors are like, it is unethical for us to continue, because you're going to pay a lot of money. We're going to do this. And here's the thing is that assessor, you cannot come to assessment with a pre-existing condition that you knew about.
Oh,
right. So if I say, hey, I'm not doing this, that you can't fix that during the assessment. Right. And so the assessor does it. All the assessing groups do this very well. They have an initial scoping call. It says, let's walk through, what you need, what you require, what your network diagram, what's your data flow. And they do all that. And it becomes really obvious within 20 minutes if they're ready or not. And so about half of them aren't even getting past the first call.
Damn. So yeah, if you can't even get past the first call, that says a lot. Well, then, in the grand scheme of best practices, which best practice are most people not practicing? Because, I could think of a laundry list of them, but you're the one actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Bad password seems to be.
No, so the problem most folks have is proving that you're doing what you're doing. So I'm going to attest that every one of my endpoints, whatever device that may be, is configured to a standard security baseline, right? And so let's say I'm using the Distance Scuba guide or whatever. Now you have to prove that every implementation that's handling CUI has that baseline, right? So it's not just saying I did it. It's now proving that you've done it. And if I'm an assessor and I say, can you just give me random I want to see those 3 devices from your asset management portfolio, pull them up, and does it match the baseline? Then the assessor will. The assessor go through and say, well, I thought you said you followed this baseline. But clearly that's not in the baseline, right? Identity, access, and privilege access management, I think is universally something that people that struggle with is having that lockdown. Change management. It's not good enough just to say I follow a process, but then you got to prove that the process you've articulated, you're actually doing. Did someone fill out that form? Is the form actually signed by a manager? Is that ticket, following from genesis to closure to implementation? It is a very, very exacting assessment. And for every one of the practices, there's 3 points of proof to validate that you're doing it.
I've been asking everybody this question. I want to get your thoughts, especially from the military background and leadership and all. It's do you think collectively that we're actually doing better in this market, or are we stagnant, or are we, I my gut tells me that we're trying really hard, but I don't see a lot of necessarily progress. Maybe go, cyber's getting better.
Yeah, the numbers certainly would belie the fact it's getting better. Ransomware is reaching all-time high. Several sources have quoted the cost of $10.5 trillion in transfer of wealth from cybercrime over the last 10 years. That's the largest transfer of wealth in human history.
A crazy amount of dollars.
I personally, like going back to our military background, I really wish the government would treat cybercrime as a part of global war on terror. Because I do believe it's business terrorism. And you may not feel that way until you lose your job because someone slacked your company.
Or until someone dies at your hospital because they can't get treatment.
Absolutely. And so I do think, and part of it is like, we rely on law enforcement, which has very limited capabilities to do this at scale. And all the same problems that we had before now, where you can't use intelligence agencies to gather information about, the people participating in this, and can't share it with law enforcement, et cetera. It's very onerous, and there's not that same flow that we have now that you say that is a terrorist organization. I can now share information across the agency, et cetera. So I think we still have some of that stovepiping with cybercrime, right? You can't just bring in the intelligence agencies over cyber criminal activity, right? I mean, unless it's that, that clear and present danger. And I don't think until we have some folks willing to address it that way, that will make significant progress in the cybercrime arena. I think in the nation state arena, we've known about it a long time, but I think the government and the DoD has come exponentially farther along in the defense of our infrastructure for the DoD and the Fed writ large, but commercial industry is lacking. There are some caveats. Industry verticals that have highly regulated and highly rigorous compliant environments, let's say the financial, they do way better statistically. Like, compliance doesn't mean security, but you got a roadmap, and you've got to be assessed by somebody outside your organization. And that makes a big difference. Manufacturing lags way behind because it's not a compliant environment. Your manufacturing plants and your OT environments are largely not looked at to the same level of fidelity. And so they've lagged behind. And it's also, when you shellac a manufacturing plant, it gets very expensive for that company very quickly. So there's a compulsion to pay, right? So are we getting better? I don't know. The adversary is as good as any of us, especially when they're motivated by trillions of dollars. And the Commonwealth of Independent States, which houses a lot of these criminal groups, cybercrime pays as good or better than commercial industry. So, I don't think we're getting better until we take a different approach.
But a different approach has to start from on high.
It does. It really does.
I mean, leadership has to jump on that and drive it forward. I mean, I'm always a fan of, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, Hezbollah was going after the IDF, and they had a cell in Hezbollah that was the hacker cell, right? And they kept defacing IDF sites and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the IDF finally had enough of it, and they knew where these people were because they have really good intel or whatever else. They just took out the floor of the building where the people were. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Like, we don't do that. We have this defend forward and whatever else, but we don't fling metal down range based on cyber stuff, even though I guess probably our attribution is probably a little bit,
Yeah, I think, that's part of the problem, that we're not leveraging intelligence agencies for the cybercrime. We have really good attribution against nation state. We don't have sort of cybercrime. Well, commercial industry actually does. And the intelligence agencies do. It's that same barrier that exists. You can't really.
But a lot of nation states in cybercrime are.
Of course, because they make a lot of illicit money that way, right? Like Russia turns a blind eye. And so a lot of those countries, because it brings in a lot of cash. So I think there is an economic driver to this that can't be ignored. But I do think if you look sort of like analogous to the financial markets after Enron, Sarbanes-Oxley, everyone's like, oh my God, we don't need this compliant framework, blah. But 30 years later, or almost 40 years, I guess, I think most people in that sector would say it helped bring trust and faith and stability back to the markets when necessary. And corporations that had to sign to the principles of, general accepted accounting principles, et cetera. I would judge it did achieve its end goal. Sarbanes-Oxley. I don't want to victim shame. The reality is corporations are victims of cybercrime. They're victims of espionage, but that doesn't obviate you from doing due diligence, right? I mean, if your house gets broken into and you live in a bad neighborhood, but you left all your doors and windows open, is a criminal still a fault? Yes, they are. But did you kind of let them in?
Kind of made it a thing.
And so I do think that the government should be helping corporations by going after these folks more aggressively. And there is another problem with attribution. It's not necessarily attribution, but you can go after the people. The challenge that we had even back when you and I were on active duty was, what if Hezbollah is using a server that's in Germany or Poland or Canada? Now I'm attacking infrastructure that's in a friendly nation. That's not a good thing. Those are considered acts of war, right? So even if you wanted to take out infrastructure, like to limit the scope and the damage, then we've taken down like lockbit infrastructure. We did that through lawful legal means. We worked with international agencies, and that solves a temporary problem, right? It impedes business. They have to reconstitute, they have to refile, and then some people might be labeled in indictments. But if you really want to go after the IDF did, where you're taking out people physically, I mean, that is an option in the global war on terror.
Make people think twice, at least,
Absolutely. If I got a predator circling above, I may not want to do that. Is that probably, people like, oh, I don't know if we're there yet. I don't know. But if you've lost your job to these clowns and they're living high in the med, vacationing around the world, or
if you got a loved one that couldn't get dialysis treatment, died,
I have very little sympathy for the cybercrime organizations. These are sophisticated criminal networks. This isn't, Mr. Robot in the basement screaming at mom for a cookie. Like those people work for these, but these are sophisticated corporate networks. I mean, they function like corporations. We would do well to consider them near peer competitors rather than just, it's a lone hacker. Yeah. The lone hacker is a Hollywood version of these things. These are very sophisticated networks, and they have resiliency and they have market dynamics. I mean, now you've got initial access brokers, you've got developers and operators, you've got affiliate groups, and they can lease their software, they can borrow their software, they work with different initial access brokers. So there's fungibility, there's flexibility, there's diversity in the marketplace, and now you're talking about a true economy that's thriving off the theft of your hard-earned.
It's like an APT that's not an APT.
Yeah.
Like non-APT PT, I guess. So last question I really wanted to get to, just on the compliance side and that type of thing. In your opinion, if someone overtly violates best practices and compliance and does all the stuff that we've kind of seen, do you think that folks should start going to prison for that?
Depends. I think if you deliberately have misrepresented yourself and you to the government, you should pay the consequences to that. Again, not victim shaming. It's one thing if you say, I'm sucking and I know I suck.
Help me.
It's another thing to say, I'm a 110. I got a perfect score. We've assessed ourselves. We are good to go, knowing full well you're not. And there have been instances that the government has gone after corporations for doing that. And the SEC has taken that up now with publicly traded companies. Like, you are now misrepresenting yourself to the SEC. You made false financial statements based on your cybersecurity, trying to hold CISOs accountable. I just think that if you're going to hold someone culpable for negligence, there has to be true negligence there, or true willful obfuscation of the truth. I don't think, for example, the city of Atlanta got shellacked. Yours truly was the incident response commander for that, one of many over the 8 months or so. But it was and one of the things I told the mayor at the time, and I really admire Keisha Lance Bottom. She was the epitome of a very cool leader under pressure. She'd just taken office 45 days prior, and and literally it shut the city down. They got hit with Sam, and the squad cars couldn't run plates. You couldn't pay your water bills. I mean, the city was shellacked. She was very, very cool under leadership, and the city council was attacking her, and she was getting calls from everyone. And I'm like, remember, ma'am, you're the victim here. Like, that, yes, well, the things we could have done better, et cetera. But these were criminals that went after you as a municipality. They went after the citizens of your city. And so don't let someone victim shame you into like, you should have done this, you should have done that. There are things they could have done better, and there are things that they can still improve, as every city can. But at no time did someone willfully misrepresent where they were. No one got up in front of the press and said, we're perfect. No one signed any compliant or attestations that said that they were good. So where they may have had the lack of really good security and depth and good architecture, and if they may have lacked enough sophisticated leadership along the technical level, what they didn't have was willful negligence. And in fact, the mayor at the time exuded leadership in a crisis situation. So I think she handled it remarkably well. So do I think that would cause for criminal activity? Not really. I don't think it meets the standard of someone willful neglect or gross misrepresentation.
So like Equifax, though, or SolarWinds, or some of those, were like years of reporting of admin to the internet, and they go like that. Somebody should go to jail for that. I would argue.
It depends. Like, I'm not privy to the specifics. I can make some inferential like that, and I would say that when you have that level of impact, there should be some level of culpability there. somewhere, right?
Because I mean, if I'm an executive and I'm at one of those companies and things go sideways and I'm going to get my golden parachute regardless. All right, I lost my job, but I walked out with a $6 or $8 million payday.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I think there should be the same level of scrutiny and culpability or
like
accountability. Not
airline
culpability.
industry.
Yeah. Accountability, like Sarbanes-Oxley, right? I'm now signing financial attestation that says I am meeting general accounting principles and my balance sheet says on my balance sheet and I'm representing to a standard set of practices. And we hold corporation leadership accountable if that's fraudulent or if it's misrepresented or they do, like, we perp walk people. I do believe that same level of scrutiny should apply to cyber. If you are willfully misrepresenting where you are in your security, because look, it's your investors, your stakeholders, in the defense industrial base, it's the taxpayer, it's your safety citizen, health and care, it's patients. I do believe there should be a level of or accountability for culpable behavior.
There we go. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me, brother.
It's great stuff, man. Y'all, if you're out there looking to solve CMMC, you're looking to talk to folks that know what they're doing in cyber, reach out to Cape Endeavors and Terry and his team.
And conversely, if you want a sanity check on where we are in cybersecurity, I highly recommend Chase. So.
Thank you very much.